Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage RanDee and Kristin.
Hello, my name is RanDee Platt. I head customer experience and customer communications for Santander Bank here in the US. If anybody's, show of hands, who's familiar with Santander? Wow. I like travel in circles of people who act like that's a foreign word, which it is, when I say it and have no idea that it's a bank. So that's pretty impressive. We are a global bank, the world's largest consumer bank. Yes, bigger than Chase. We like to say that globally. Our retail footprint in the US is in the upper Northeast. And some of you may have seen that last week we announced our intention to buy Webster Bank or acquire Webster Bank in the upper Northeast, which will make us one of the 10 largest banks in the US. So very exciting. But what we're really excited to talk about is our evolution of customer experience. And I'm going to let Kristin introduce herself and then we'll get started.
Yep. I'm Kristin Boyd, and I'm Director of Customer Journeys and Improvements at Santander.
That was fast. She's like, let's get this show on the road. And then I just very quickly want to introduce, I have one other team member here who's maybe going to have to answer some questions if you guys throw us any tough balls, who leads our Insights, VOC, and customer advocacy programs, and that's Caitlin Denon right here in the front. So in case we have her here too if you ask us hard questions about modernizing the insights. So what Kristin and I are going to really talk to you about is a word, how we navigated a word, or two words rather, that you all probably talk about pretty often in your business. I would imagine it's a word you talk about, digital transformation or transformation, right? You've got to transform the business. For us, that was a little bit scary 3 or 4 years ago. That journey started for us. Kristin and I and our team started to get a bunch of inquiries on how CX wanted to participate in these siloed initiatives that were going to have customer impact. And we got to a place where we said, oh, wait a minute. This is going to potentially be very bad for us. And so what we want to talk about is how we navigated that predicament we were in, how we protected growth during disruption when, quite frankly, probably most teams would struggle to operate at all. And that required a lot of effort from my customer experience team. It's not a story about products and tools and capital expense investment. I want to be very clear, there was none of that, right? We didn't have money. We weren't investing. We had to work within the box that we had. And what changed for us was how we showed up for the business and became a key lever of retention and growth. So that's what we're going to talk you through today. We want to show you very real examples of how we did that and how you might be able to do something similar in your business, and how that really has made us a center of impact at Santander by materially driving business outcomes. And for us as a bank, that is reducing attrition, protecting deposits, which is our bread and butter, right? We make money by taking deposits in and lending money out. So having those deposits is critically important to us, and how we improve loyalty while fundamentally changing the way that customers interact with us as a bank and a brand. No capital expense investment, no new tools, no extra resources, but this gives you an idea of the convergence that we were dealing with. And when I say the type of changes that we were undergoing in a transformation, we needed to take paper really out of the business as much as possible. So how many of you still get a paperless statement today for any of your bank products? We were migrating product, rationalizing our product set, taking our products from hundreds to just a few, getting out of safe deposit boxes and other services, like not doing non-customer transactions. I see a lot of people shaking their heads, right? Lots of service reduction and business simplification efforts. And as we started to look at that, and just for reference, Alloy 2.0 on the bottom is branch closures, right? Reducing our physical footprint, which is a major undertaking for us and the most impactful change we can make for our customers. So we started looking at the convergence of these issues, and that's where we started to get a little bit nervous, because there's not just one change that's going to impact a customer, but these were decisions that were made. right? We knew as a business these things had to change. So no one came to customer experience necessarily and said, "Hey, what do you think about these changes?" Right? I also want to be clear that it's not a story about CX consulting or advising on if the change was going to happen for our customers or not. It was, we have to do this if we're going to succeed. It was, the story is really about how we did that, right? Through execution, and through fundamental evolution of how CX interacts with the business. Some of the other things that we were dealing with was a core migration to the cloud and really ensuring that we contained the level of change customers were experiencing, what the positioning of that was, and we'll go through some of that. But probably no surprise to you all, if you're a bank customer and your branch is closing, you're told that you're in a product that you really like, it's going to change, it might impact you in some way. You can no longer purchase money orders from us, and we're closing your safe deposit box within a series of a couple of months. It's probably no surprise that this isn't going to bring delight to the customers, right? We're way past talking about satisfaction here, right? No one's going to be satisfied with us at this point. So the first thing we did was build a case on how we were going to get the business to trust us, right? And let us sit citrally at the heart of execution.
So the way that we did that, right, is we quickly realized that we couldn't look at this silo by silo, project by project, because that's not how customers would be experiencing the vastness of these changes. So instead, we looked at grouping what are the things that customers are going to go through and segmenting that by risk and by value to our customers. And so the way that we grouped that is, you see, RanDee already talked about closures. We had done closures before. We were doing them again. We know those were highly impactful. And we also looked at product and service discontinuations. And so with that, then we looked at the value of our customers, and you can see we came up with this heat map. One thing I want you to notice is, do you see a single CX metric on that page? Right? This is all about the business and the risks to the business if we didn't act thoughtfully and intentionally. So you see in the upper right, we've got our highest risk, highest value customers. You can imagine these were smaller populations, but impactful for sure. And then over on the left, our lower risk, but still impacted customers. And so what's so important about this, right, is how we built the trust with the business. This wasn't a hypothesis. This wasn't abstract. This told us specifically where attrition was going to come from if we didn't really think intentionally and coordinate the activities and how our customers receive the changes.
And I think it's important to note, this was not, if you go back a few years ago, something that we had done before, right? So I want to make sure that you all know and you hear from us. This wasn't something that we were well practiced and versed in, and we said, let's put this together. It took us time. It took us a lot of experimentation and brainstorming on how do we get the business to understand how critical these changes are going to be to the overall customer relationship. And so it is something that took us time and a lot of different types of, I would say, kind of casting that line out there and seeing what worked. This, of course, is the final product, but there was series of what this looked like beforehand before we got to this point. And so we've said it, I think, a couple of times. At this point, about 3 or 4 years ago, when this journey started for us, CX immediately stopped being about scores, right? We stopped talking about NPS. We still measure it, still valuable to us. We still measure satisfaction, still valuable to us. But we stopped talking about scores and we started talking about what mattered to the business: deposits, retention/attrition, whichever side of that coin, and growth. It became about defending the deposits, retaining relationships, preserving trust, and protecting long-term customer loyalty. That is so important to so many of us, because if you talk to most of your business teams who are in B2C businesses, you're never going to acquire customers that you have today at the same cost that you did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? That long-term loyalty is invaluable. So it was important that we knew the forecasts, we knew the risk models, and we knew that if customers didn't understand what was happening, or felt blindsided, they would leave. And that for us is not about satisfaction, it's about survival at that point as a business. We needed to carry those customers through this period of transformation, and we knew that growth had to happen inside of the box.
So what do we mean when we say inside the box, right? There were very real constraints that we had to work with. We mentioned there was no capital expense. There was no new tools, we didn't have new headcount, and no digital enhancements. And like RanDee mentioned, we were not changing timelines. These projects had been planned. We had resources, IT, marketing, communications. The train had left the station, right? And so what that meant for us was, how do we help the customers forward? Medallia was in place, but again, nothing new was coming. So instead of asking, what can we build? We had to ask, how can we execute better with what we already have? And that was the shift that put everything in motion for how we would work and continue to carry this forward.
But we need you to believe us before we tell you how we did it. Despite these changes, and I said we still measured it, and we'll talk about more collectively how we did this. Across the top is our global competitive benchmark for NPS. This is how we measure ourselves against our peers in the US. I've worked at several organizations. It's by far the hardest benchmark I've ever been a part of. But we grew 15 points in NPS over the last 3 years, changed our rank exponentially. We were near last. This last year, we finally exceeded the peer average. We're now on the positive side of the peer average. And as we thought about branch as our most important channel, we now rank number 1 in our internal benchmark, while our internal measurement really went off the charts from what we expected it to, as we thought about our relationship NPS, which is our full end-to-end all product relationship. And then our branch transactional surveys also went up. We show you this because we're going to talk more deeply about what business outcomes it drove at the end, but we know we need people to understand that this was not an all for naught, and this was started 4 years ago for us, right? We're not kind of a year or 2 into it. This is a long journey that we've been on. And the way we did that, we became executors. We stopped being advocates. We stopped being advisors. And to be fair, we kind of stopped doing what the business thought was most important and started doing what we thought was important from what we saw in the data, what that heat map and other similar exercise showed us, and we reorganized ourselves around that. So before, we were very reactive. We had pretty fragmented insights by survey program and other data sources, and we were kind of organized by individual siloed journeys. We have become now the center of orchestration and coordination for most changes. I would venture to say most customer-facing changes are managed by our team, and I mean our team. I don't have somebody who sits on a work stream that's led by somebody else. We're often leading those work streams. Our work is aligned to business priorities and KPIs, so my OKRs are tied directly to what the business OKRs are tied to. And we have, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot, are very focused on the execution of the actions that we know need to happen. And I would say that we went from raising concerns to owning the result.
So we know you come here because you want to understand how these things are done so you can take back things to your own work. So we'll take you through probably the bulk of the rest of our time is how we did this. And we focused our work on 5 key areas. First is the centralized CX engine, which is how we organized our team to support the work that needed to be done. Next is how we modernized insights, which is how we used Medallia with our internal data to drive action forward. The governance model that we established in order to bring all of our stakeholders together across these multitude of changes. How we as a team move insights to action to create programs and deliver those programs. And then lastly, how we own the customer strategy directly impacting customers at the individual level and with new strategies. We'll jump right into these. So first, when we talk about our centralized CX engine, we had to consider all the change that was coming. And RanDee just mentioned all of our KPIs are supporting the business KPIs, which meant we had to identify the work that would need to be done in order for us to be successful. And so we really organized the team in 4 key execution areas. First is the insight generation and analysis. So part of that is Medallia, right, and the surveys and the tools, but it's also the internal data that we've been able to connect to our Medallia surveys and tools. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but that's really what that one is about. Next is the journey design and improvement. That's what my team does. We spend a lot of time going very deep on what changes customers will experience on a step-by-step level across channels, unhappy paths, to identify how they'll understand the change, what friction they'll experience, customer communication excellence. This was new for us. This is really about how we communicate to our customers. This, before we had brought customer communications into our team, it was done either by marketing or ops. Neither of them had that strategic lens of what does a customer need to know, when do they need to know it, and what's most important to them. And so this was a big change to bring all of that into the CX team, but helped make notifications through these changes more consistent for our customers. And then lastly, the advocacy and loyalty programs. This was another new body of work for us where we were creating new programs to directly impact our customers. Some of that was gifting. We'll talk about our hospitality standards, quality closed loop feedback, again, directly impacting our customers to help them have better outcomes. We talked about Medallia, right? Medallia stopped reporting the past. We said we still measure these things, but they weren't just a reflection of what happened. We knew that Medallia needed to help us shape the future. And so the first thing we did is we updated all of our programs for accountability. And what that meant, and I'll give Caitlin all the credit, I had to have her refresh my memory a little bit, was go through survey by survey, right? And look at every single question. Who is the owner of the question, and is it something we can act on? If it's something that didn't have an owner or couldn't or wouldn't be acted on, what we did was we refined it, we modified it, we cut some questions to make sure that everything that we got, we could really sink our teeth into. And so these improvements really helped with the clarity of the information that we were getting, the alignment to the drivers, and just making sure that we could make changes based on the feedback what we're getting. But where the rubber really met the road was how we applied these insights. And so these 4 areas were really critical for us. When we think about change readiness, I think Caitlin has spent countless hours saying, hey, do we know which customers had their branch closed? Which customers were impacted by IRAs? Which customers went through safe deposit? Can we measure them before and after? Right? How many of them went through all 3? So the data integrations, I think, were a huge step for us moving forward because it helped us understand that next level of impact to our customers that we couldn't previously by able to look at customers who were directly impacted by these changes. So, that was one key nugget that for us, I think has been grown and grown and grown. And I don't even know how many internal data points we now have pulled into Medallia that give us that visibility. The next one was the key driver analysis. So we spent a lot of time looking at the key driver analysis, using the tool in Medallia to really understand for our customers what the key drivers were. And with that, using segmentation, we overlaid our internal segments onto our customer feedback to understand within our different high value, mid value, more mass market customer bases, what was important to them. So as we thought about strategies, we knew what would be most critical to those populations. And then lastly, the closed loop quality control. This was something new where I'm sure you all see it. You see alerts that come in, front lines that act on them. You review them and you say, this problem could have been solved, but it still isn't. So we built criteria within Medallia so that our quality closed loop feedback team gets alerts for those, does additional follow-up on them. And then with that process, we're testing different rapid response templates to see which are most effective for our customers and using those templates to scale back to our front lines so that as those alerts continue to come in, we are more and more effective at solving our customers' problems. So with this modernization of our Medallia tool, where what we were able to do is transform Medallia into a center of prioritization. And what you see here is an example of a dashboard where we were able to bring together not only our VOC, but what were the calls that we're getting from customers? What were the topics of those calls? What are the complaints that we're getting? What are the topics? We then layered in text analytics to go deeper into what the friction points the customers were understanding and overlay onto that then, what are the fixes that need to be in place for our customers? And are they on the roadmap? Are they not on the roadmap? Should they be on the roadmap? It really enabled us to have better prioritization discussions with the business by tying NPS to the business outcomes to be able to say, not only is this, not a strong NPS, or is this a top complaint or call reason, but here's what's happening with attrition with these customers, or here's the balances and how much lower customer balances are when they experience these problems. So as you can imagine, those prioritization decisions were very critical. And then as we also are, we do report NPS. And as people say, well, look at NPS has been flat, we can say, well, we know what our key drivers are. And, if the roadmap's been delayed, we know that we're not going to see those improvements until we're working in those areas that matter most to our customers.
And I think this is a critical view of our pivot to not only talking about CX measurement, but looking at impact beyond deposits and attrition when we're looking at the percentage of calls and complaints. That's our cost to serve, right? And tying that back to the business in another way from an operational standpoint. And so you'll see on the right, If we resolve the issues that we've highlighted with on the right of the work to be done, you'll see what we're saying is going first to increase average deposit balance and reduce attrition. We do have real numbers in there, but we figured people would want to take a picture of this, and our team might not appreciate us sharing that information. That's where then this becomes critical, and a really good use case is then when our platform and product teams have to prioritize the work that they're doing and they have to rationalize what goes first. They can look at this and say, this is more impactful than this. I have to do this work first. And they have a very solid business case that's come from us to them to rationalize that with technology and operations, their development team. So there are many ways that this is used beyond us just delivering this to the business. Probably one of the most critical things or most important shifts that we made is that we aligned governance. And I think sometimes we say governance and folks think that that is a formal, lots of checking the box and meetings. And what I think is important to understand is governance can be kind of the reorganization or restructuring of routines, and how you think about those routines. And that's really when we say governance, it was how we organized ourselves around very specific routines to do the work. And so for us, we stood up what we'll show in a second, which was a CX, we called it a CX and marketing forum, where every individual change that was going to impact customers was taken in to a cross-functional group of stakeholders that sat on the CX and marketing forum and evaluated the impact to the frontline employees and the customers at the same time so that we could understand where and when and how those changes were going to impact both frontline employees and customers, because we know how connected that tissue is, and then really focused on providing, once that was taken into the forum, end-to-end oversight of changes, understanding sequencing and timing, and putting those on very specific, and we'll show an example of that, journey maps, and then building a unified messaging and retention strategy as part of those efforts. So as we thought about the forum across the top, that is a group of cross-functional stakeholders. So you've got not just customer experience, you've got employee experience, you have frontline readiness, you have product leadership, you've got really kind of everybody who's connected to those changes, operations sitting in that forum, really reviewing the individual initiative strategies so that we can understand really the full gamut of what is occurring in those siloed initiatives, asking questions, ensuring that we can really understand how we're going to orchestrate, and then bringing awareness of the impact to all levels. And then once that's done, it funnels down into the work streams down below. Protect and Defend is really focused on understanding the current experience of those customers. We'll share what that looks like in a second. Understanding coming out of those into future state journeys and retention, how we would develop strategies around those customers once we understood their journey. Employee engagement and experience was also mapping the frontline customers' experience through these changes, so that how they would find out, how they would take care of customers, what the timing of that would look like, and then building playbooks around communication so that the positioning of changes to customers and employees were exactly the same, and that the way we talked about changes was consistent time and time again so that our customers knew what the message was.
One thing I would add about governance is it really reduced the angst in the organization, because before we had governance, we'd be like, hey, did you hear this was happening? And also this, and then this is happening at the same time. And so governance created this sense that if a change was happening, it was in the inventory. We knew it was happening and it was accounted for. And this is every month we pulled together these journeys for each of the cohorts of customers. And you can see layers of the different changes, the product migrations, the closures, IRAs, safe deposit boxes, emails, direct mail, phone calls, right? When are these things actually happening? And this helped us really with two important areas. One is it helped us adjust communications and make sure that we were consistent across those communications. And it helped us identify where we should be deploying retention tactics, right? Where for our customers did it make sense to give them that extra touch that would help them feel valued as a customer of ours. This was something that was updated each time we had new items coming into the forum, so that we always had a clear picture of the changes that our customers would be going through.
And this is one of the core cohorts, do what you saw at the beginning on the heat map, right? So we're really threading that needle all the way through so that we understand how sentiment will come about. And again, the timing of those changes going back to that heat map that we showed you originally.
So with our modernized insights and with governance, those were part of it, right? But we also knew from the data what was most important to our customers. And one thing that was really important was that human element. And so with that, we used our intel around the importance of those human elements and the knowledge, right, that every good brand stands for a strong, consistent experience. And so we built a program called the Hospitality Standards, which ensured consistent service across all channels. And it really was helping our customers every step of the way. So you'll see things on here like opening the doors 10 minutes early, closing 10 minutes late, being ready for appointments, making sure that sound equipment on the phones was good, that we had standards for hold times, that we were walking customers to the door. So there's a lot of things on here, right? But that meant consistent treatment for our customers. And it wasn't just that we launched this as a nice marketing piece, but along with it, we built visit and observation guides. Every person in our human channels was trained from the top leaders down to all the agents, branch teams, and so on, received robust trainings. And then with those visit and observation guides, we did quarterly calibrations to make sure that across our network and across our call centers, we had consistent treatment and evaluations of that treatment all along the way.
Yeah, I think though, probably very notable here, we weren't looking to differentiate ourselves, but we wanted to make sure every single time a customer interacted with us, they had a same consistent experience regardless of what channel they were in. Sounds really simple, but this has been one of the most impactful initiatives that we launched that had no capital expense associated to it, but came from modernizing our insights. I think we've said a lot of this, and I wanna make sure we leave time for questions, but I think as you think about the previous 4 bodies of work and how we did this, what it has led to is that it has positioned customer experience as really leading now the customer strategy as part of the changes that we make. We're not asked after the fact. We're typically brought in very early. We are very proactive in how we think about the how and what execution looks like for us. And that really includes many of the things we've talked about, which is mapping and analyzing what the experience will look like before it happens, developing communications playbooks around that, deciding what customer research needs to be done, and then developing very targeted treatment plans and strategies around what we know customers will experience.
So we've mentioned retention strategies and treatment plans a couple times, so we didn't want to leave you in the dark on what that meant. If you think to that original heat map, and we talked about those 2 high risk, high value populations in the upper right hand corner, these were the strategies that we came with them, right? We knew that there was a difference between what our customers value, whether they're more affluent or more mass market. But what we did is we really exploited programs that were in place, right? Because you're probably sitting here thinking, well, finding a gift is hard because what's the right gift and how are we going to get it to everyone? And what are the things that we can do here? So what we did is we exploited existing programs. Money market repricing was something that we used for all of our cohorts. For our affluent customers, we have programs for events. And so this data and intel let us say, hey, here's a group of customers who's going through meaningful change that's not on those invite lists. Can we put them on those invite lists? No additional expense to us, but it did help our customers get that extra soft touch. And similarly, we use our gifting programs in the same way to identify those customers. And then we did use account credits and fee waivers for our more mass market customers as well. So, I think the key takeaway on this is using programs that you have in place to offer soft touches as customers are going through change.
So, we said in the beginning, we bring you back to then what this did for us. I think, this is a result of discipline for us. Discipline around execution, discipline around orchestration, discipline around coordination as we think about change management for our customers. And what we realized was that we only had 21% of the projected attrition coming out of this. 104% of a product that we thought would attrite, I think nearly 80%, we retained 104% of the balance goals. Impacted customers had meaningfully lower balance attrition. Imagine that. If you're being very thoughtful about how you're touching those customers, explaining changes to customers, and building trust, they're less likely to attrite. We had lots of cost savings from some of these exercises, nearly $6 million alone in paperless migration. The upside to that was not only that we stopped serving those customers in paper, but they're now more digitally engaged. Digitally engaged customers are stickier, as most of you know. And really, I think the story to all of this is that our customers stayed. And as I talked about in the beginning, that is more valuable to us than just about anything else.
So you've heard us talk a lot about insight, execution, alignment across your teams. So what are the things that you can take away today? We wanted to make sure to leave you with this, which is really 4 things on the right here that I think made the key difference for us. One is you have your Medallia programs. Layering in your internal data is what's going to take your insights to the next level. Next is finding opportunities to demonstrate impact and building buy-in through those, right? We talked about starting small, find that project that doesn't have a clear owner that is creating friction across the business, build a business case for it and demonstrate the ROI for it, and that's how you're going to build momentum. Establish governance for transparency across the business, and I think we use lowercase governance, not big G governance, right? Like RanDee talked about, a way of bringing people together for those decisions. And then lastly, making sure that your team is set up to support the business priorities so that you are aligned to the outcomes and that the work that you're doing is helping deliver those.
If we would say one thing we want you to take away, if there is nothing else, is that CX doesn't have to only be an enabler. CX can be a driver of the business, right? CX can be the executor of transformation. It does not have to be advisory, but you do have to prove yourself to the business. And that starts somewhere if you don't automatically sit in the business. It's about how we operated. The way we operated in many cases has now been adopted globally for us as an organization. And as we said previously, we're really asked to lead. We're no longer a cost center that businesses have to just attribute some cost back to and pay for us. We are part of their growth engine, which is a very meaningful change for us, and I'm sure would be for many of you. So, with that, like any good CX practitioners, we'd love your feedback. So, please feel free to scan the QR code. We've got, I think, right about 9 to 10 minutes for questions.
Hi, I'm Anne Louise Mason from Capital One, and so really excited to hear all of the great work that you've done at Santander and the long-term impacts that it's had on the business. One of the questions I have is, I know that there is some acquisition work happening in Santander, and I feel that you ladies must be very busy as you are flexing the systems that you have developed and the work that you've put in place. How is this local work at Santander starting to reach forward as you're thinking about expanding your footprint? And is it something that you have a plan to scale?
Yes. So, to be fully transparent with you, there's a little bit of a debate in our organization constantly about where does customer experience sit. It's become a little bit more of an intense debate as of late, the more ingrained in some of the business work we do, and I think probably a never-ending debate. One thing that we know for sure as it relates to integration work, when we get regulatory approval and we make it through that and we've signed on the dotted line, is that we know that CX will, as you think about even that work going forward, much of what you see here is exactly what we will do. Right, like, this is a replicatable process, and so how we think about that will always start with, let's design the experience we want to have by mapping the journeys. We'll start with segmentation work and a heat map, understanding all of the customers that will be impacted, but what we have done here is really scalable and applicable to just about any type of initiative, including M&A, right, that we go through. In November, we sold 7 branches in Pennsylvania to Community Bank. We did exactly this entire thing, right? We understood segmentation of the customers that were going to be impacted. We did a lot of heat mapping, understood what was at risk for us, ensured that all of the folks involved understood, did a lot of comms planning and position messaging around that, and designed the journey maps, and then ensured that then how we executed on the changes for those customers were effectively operated according to those plans. So I think, that is probably one of our biggest learning lessons, is that what we do here can be scaled to just about any initiative that you're working on.
Hi, I'm Karina from Ship. Thank you so much for a great and engaging talk. I'll be honest though, I'm a little stuck where you say owning outcomes, only because how do you work together with leadership? Every VP has their North Star, has the metric that they own, the initiative that they're responsible for, but it sounds like there's maybe some co-ownership happening here. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think I'm not gonna I wouldn't say that it always is really pretty. Over probably the last few years, We've done a lot of work with business owners. So we have GMs of the business, right? For us, it's deposits and lending, channel ownerships, whether that's digital or in-person contact center. So we spend a lot of time with those folks on what matters most to them, right? They have a million to a billion KPIs, right, that they're tracking and measuring. What's most important for us to understand is what is most important to them and how do we engage around the initiatives or the projects to drive. So I think that it's not a super simple, straightforward answer, but we sit down with them and OKR planning, which is relatively new for us as an organization, and really make sure we understand what are the most important things. We know you've got a lot of KPIs. We're not going to impact all of those. What are the most important ones that we can drive and still do some enabling around? There's some that we know we're not going to impact, but the ones that we know where we can feasibly touch the customer, those are the ones that then we focus on, right? We know that the actions that we can take are going to impact retention, are going to impact growth potentially. And then we get really hyper focused on that and use the insights that we have through the modernization of that program to build around it. But I would say that it's a continued evolution and reiteration and understanding what we will or won't touch.
One thing I would add, yeah, is right. It seems like retention has become a very critical measure because of that cost of acquisition. And so, right, like I would say, if nothing else, we have learned a lot from each of these. So when we come up with a new initiative, we can look back and say, which of these was most similar and how did that impact or attrition or retention of our customers? And that's become a good way for us to level set because while there are different specific KPIs across the businesses, that's become pretty foundational.
You went from a traditional CX platform or strategy, and you kind of changed it to a different strategy. You actually kind of owned the outcome. Did that require you to have to get more executive buy-in to change your overall CX strategy? Did you have to kind of like campaign for that type of model?
Trust is earned through work, right? And being able to demonstrate the value of your work, right? So as soon as we kicked this off and more individual initiatives came in, we ensured that we were constantly tracking and measuring the progress of the work we were doing and success at key intervals. That's the only way, right? I think if you would have asked anybody in our organization 4 years ago from an executive leadership standpoint, do you need CX to be involved in this stuff? Most folks would have said, no. They'll tell us what the surveys say and they'll track complaints. And so as we kind of pivoted, we ensured that they understood how effective this work was. And I know that's hard for some of us because you feel like you're elevating the work that you've done, you're putting yourself on a pedestal a little bit, but it is critical that you're sharing the outcome of the work as it goes, right? That has to be done. And if you don't do that, then I think it's really hard to get buy-in, but that's one of the ways we've been most successful. There's no question what we're working on and how it's impacting the work because we are constantly sharing that. Kristin and I will hang around. We're happy to answer any other questions or have any other chats, but thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to meeting you.